Everybody. Pleasure to be here today again at another SDI event. My name is Hannah. As David mentioned, I'm working for the company TOPdesk, and my role really is a consultant, and I specialise in knowledge management. And this all started about 5 years ago, where I heard about this thing called KCS. And honestly, it sounds really cheesy, but it did change my life a little bit, KCS, because it kind of forged a career path for me and something that I'm now really passionate about and really enjoy doing. If you haven't heard of it, KCS, it stands for Knowledge Centered Services. It's a methodology for knowledge management, a process to follow, and it's from the Consortium for Service Innovation. And it might just change your approach to knowledge as well. I ended up becoming certified in KCS practices a few years ago, and now part of my role is actually working with organisations to help them implement this method for their own knowledge bases and their own processes as well. And the concepts that I'd like to share with you today, these are all from KCS. So if you get a chance after the event today, definitely do check out the consortium's website, have a look up for KCS or Knowledge Centered Services. There's some wonderful resources online that I think you'll really, really enjoy. And yeah, my main goal from this presentation is to leave everybody listening with two really easy, very tangible, very practical things that you can do to optimize your knowledge discovery. So that's discovery of all the knowledge items that you've put in a lot of effort to creating by your customers, rather than them going unseen or unused, which can happen quite often sometimes. But before we dive into what those two things are, I had a question which you may have seen up on the screen before. How good is your memory? Bit of a mean question for a Tuesday morning, and a rhetorical one, don't worry, you don't have to answer in a poll. You know, some of us will think, usually we have an idea of like, oh, I've got a pretty good memory actually, I can remember things quite well, or oh no, my memory's terrible, things just, you know, can't keep hold of them in my brain. And whether you consider yourselves on either end of the scale or sort of in the middle with an average memory, something that is common across most of our ability to remember things is that usually most people will say there's some things that they can remember without hesitation, just like click their fingers and they remember. And then there's other things that just sort of fall out of our heads and we cannot retain that information. And it's usually sort of the more day-to-day things. Like, for example, most people will be able to say straight away who was the first person to land on the moon and what their first words were, because it's, you know, a really big historical event. We remember it. Sure, we don't need to know it every single day, but it sticks in our brain. Whereas more day-to-day things like the amount or the sensible amount or portion of rice or pasta to cook for each person, which might be something that you have to think about on a relatively regular basis, that can kind of slip out our brains a little bit. And many people, myself included, will find it harder to remember more standard day-to-day things, and yet for some uncanny reason, there are these other facts and other seemingly useless bits of information that are always retained. I like to use the example of which British monarch, and I'm sure you know the answer to this, had 6 wives. And I bet you can tell me how each of them died as well, because of the handy little jingle. I can also, and this is really stupid, but I can tell you anyway, I can remember all of the words to the song in The Simpsons sung by Mr. Burns called See My Vest, made from real gorilla's chest. And I won't sing it for you now, because that wouldn't be what we've all come here to see, but like totally useless information, but for some reason I can just remember it. And yeah, I can't remember what time the supermarket shuts on a Sunday, despite that being very useful, and it hasn't changed for years. And it turns out there might be a reason why we tend to forget certain pieces of information like this, and it's down to something called the Google effect. So you might have heard of it by another name, digital amnesia. And it's on the rise. It's something that's gotten increasing over the last years. And the Google effect is basically the tendency to forget information that can be easily found in search engines. And they did some research actually back in 2011, and they looked at a couple of main things. One of them is it showed that if you know the answer to something, the research showed that rather than rack your brains and really try and remember what that piece of information is, we're much more likely and we're primed to think to turn to a search engine first of all. So our first port of call is always to search for something, even if we know the answer. And the second thing this research showed was that people are much more likely to remember where information is located or how they found it, so like what search engine they used or what they searched for, rather than the information itself, which is really interesting, isn't it? Like how our brains have been sort of changed and our behavior has changed based on search. And for me, this really highlights the power of search and how important it is and how much it has changed our behavior and the way we expect to find things and the way we expect to find answers. And as a result, search is really one of those things that will make or break our knowledge bases for our end users, for our customers. And so the two top tips that I wanted to share with you today that we use a lot with organizations implementing KCS, they're actually both about search because it's such an important way to optimize knowledge discovery. So 2 tips, I'm going to share them with you now. They're actually questions. The first question is, do you know what your customers are searching for? And the second question, do you know what your customers see when they do search? So 2 questions for you to consider today. Let's start with the first one. Do you know what your customers are searching for? So take a moment, think to yourself the last time you maybe had a fault or an issue with something around the house, an appliance maybe. What do you usually tend to pop into Google or your search engine of choice? Doesn't have to be Google, of course. Well, as a general rule, we tend to search for our pains. We tend to search for the thing that's aggravating us at that moment, what's going wrong, what we're experiencing, the error that's in your face, the breakage that's so frustrating. We search for our experience, what we can see in front of our very eyes, because that's what's real to us at that moment. And KCS calls this our context. It's what we're experiencing in our own words and in our own phrases. And what we don't tend to search for is solutions. Sometimes we do, like sometimes, if we have the issue a few times, maybe we do know what the solution is, we will actually specifically search for a solution. But the vast majority of the time, especially if it's the first time we've experienced something, we won't search for the solution because at that point, we don't actually know what the solution is. And it's a little bit ironic, really, because in some ways, knowledge bases are a library of solutions, or at least diagnostic steps, perhaps, to lead to solutions. And I think that makes sense sometimes why we see people can't find knowledge when they need it because they're not searching for the solutions, they're searching for their issue, their context in their own words. So that's a good rule of thumb, really, to bear in mind. Your users are searching for their pains, they're searching for their context in their own words and phrases. And quite often it's hard for us to know or to predict what that context is going to be. And we can obviously give it our best guess, but like removing ourselves from our role and from our position in the organization to really put ourselves in the shoes of a customer can be quite tricky, especially in, Claire was talking about this in the presentation before, you'll have things like acronyms and, technical jargon that you don't realize is technical. So it's really hard to kind of remove yourself from that position. So the best way of truly knowing what's being searched for is actually by knowing what is being searched for. And the majority of knowledge tools or service management tools that have got a knowledge module or knowledge integrated, they'll have a mechanism so you can download the search terms or look in the database and see what people are typing into your search bar. And if you can get hold of that information, it can be really enlightening. I'm sure many people here have similarly been enlightened when you're searching for something on Google and it shows you other search terms that other users have used as well. God, I didn't realize people are searching for that. It's, you just don't expect it. And in a similar way, knowing the search terms that your users are using will unlock context and unlock experiences that you had no idea were there. So it's really good to be able to do this if you can. I'd like to share with you some actual examples of when we've done this at organisations and some of the things that we found. This one organisation I worked with, they had a lot of knowledge articles about phishing emails going out. How to detect a phishing email, what to do if you think you've got one, how to report it, that sort of thing. When they downloaded the search terms, they found that the majority of their customers were searching for spam. They didn't call it phishing, they called it spam. Similarly, in another instance, there was a knowledge article of what to do if you wanted to change your name. So if your first name or your last name changed and you needed to update that in the organizational systems, this knowledge article told you the steps of how to do this. But people weren't finding it, and what they found people were searching for, which I think is really interesting. They were using phrases that included the words like marriage or divorce, because that was the sort of context for that person at that moment in time. They were searching for phrases about the thing that had caused their name to change. I think it's really interesting. And my favorite one, this is ironic because I can't actually remember the name of this piece of software, but another organization had lots of amazing knowledge articles about a piece of software, you know, how to troubleshoot things, how to set stuff up, how to report on it, etc. But nobody knew it by its actual name. Everybody called it the frying pan because the icon for it looked a little bit like a frying pan, supposedly. So everyone was calling it the frying pan. No one was finding these knowledge articles which had the actual name of the software in. And these look like really small things, but they can make a huge difference to your knowledge discovery, because these search terms, these are your truth. And if you know this, if you know what your customers are searching for, you can then optimize your knowledge articles off the back of these terms so that they are more findable. That's a KCS term. They're making these articles as findable as possible. Now, naturally, knowing your software tool and your knowledge tool is going to be quite important for this. Most tools will have a section on your knowledge article where you can input like keywords, for example, and those keywords will then match with people's search terms and be used to bump knowledge articles up the search list. You could even, consider changing the name of the knowledge article completely. Instead of like identifying a phishing email, it actually could be called identifying a spam email. And by doing this, you're optimizing your knowledge so it's as findable as possible. And of course, this is really good for existing knowledge base articles, of course, but you might also find when you're looking at those search terms that there's like whole gaps in the knowledge base or domains of things that people are searching for. We actually don't have any knowledge on that either. So search phrases can also be the birth of brand new knowledge articles that don't even exist yet. So it's pretty cool what you can do with the things that people type into your search box. So if you can answer that first question, do you know what your users are searching for? You'll have your first treasure trove of information that you can use to optimize your knowledge base. Let's now look at the second question. Do you know what your customers see when they search? And I mean, actually, what do they see on the screen? So if you were to put yourselves in the shoes of the customer, go to that search bar and type in a query or a phrase, whatever it might be, what do you see? What pops up? What gets suggested? What previews of a knowledge article or multiple articles do they see before they pick the one that's for them? Let's look at an example of this together. I'd like to imagine in this case that we are a customer or an end user and we've got an issue and we can't log into Teams. We use Teams at this organization, we cannot log in, keep getting this weird error message that says, did not receive a response. I don't really know what that means, response. Maybe I've got my password wrong, I'm going to try it a few more times. No, fifth time, definitely haven't got my password wrong. I'm going to have to find an answer to this and try and get it sorted. So head to the knowledge base search and at the top type in cannot sign into Teams. Try this yourself, by the way, when you get back after this event, find your knowledge search and type in a phrase like this or a similar one to see what pops up. Because most tools will usually always show the same specific fields to somebody when they search. And in this example on the screen, you can see here, I can see the title field. I can also see another field below it in this example. Usually it will be something like a summary field or a brief description field, or maybe even the first line of the knowledge article itself, to be fair. But you must know what those fields are. If you're a knowledge manager or anyone really involved in the process of knowledge, maintenance, creation, all of that good stuff, you must know what these fields are, because these visible fields, these are your clickbait fields. Perhaps you've heard of clickbait before. It's a phrase that's been around for a while, not necessarily with knowledge, but I'm bringing it into users' knowledge as well. You will have seen clickbait on the internet. It's basically when you see stuff like this, when people write things to get clicks, to get them opened, because it really entices you to open it. And you're thinking to yourself, I couldn't possibly sleep at night if I do not know what that sheep has done, that kind of thing. Now, wouldn't it be nice if people were that desperate to open our knowledge items as well? That doesn't mean, of course, though, that we have to write all of our knowledge articles as 10 ways to make a banging pivot table in Excel. No, we can do better than this, because in knowledge bases, our clickbait is our context. Just like we were talking about before, what that user experiences, their pain, their environment, the words and phrases that they use about what's happening to them at that moment will entice them to open that knowledge article. Because if you put yourselves again in the shoes of that customer before and we had that Teams issue, at that moment of search, as a customer, you're pretty stressed. You're pretty annoyed that something isn't working. You've got things to be getting on with. I just want to find the answer quickly. We want our issue to be recognized and someone to say, yes, I know what that is. I recognize your issue and here's the solution for it. So if we're able to put that context and that pain into the clickbait fields, I can guarantee you will increase the number of people opening that knowledge article. Back to that example again of the Teams issue to kind of complete the story and show you what I mean. In the first screenshot that I showed you, this one here, the knowledge article that's being presented or suggested to this particular user, it looks through their eyes and read this and they're thinking to themselves, okay, it's suggesting accounts, setting up single sign-on, configuring Muffer two-factor authentic. I don't even know what that is. God, this is too hard. I'm just going to pick up the phone and ring somebody. Compared to, okay, I've got a different knowledge article here. This one says problem, cannot sign in. Yes, that's me. I can't sign in. Error message. We didn't receive a response. That's my error message. That's me. I feel seen. This is the one for me. And they see their pain as recognized and they know that the solution that they need is going to be in that knowledge article. So that's their clickbait, and they open it and they follow it and save yourself a call as well to the service desk. And that's what we call a bit of a win-win situation, because in that story, not only is the customer able to find what they needed because the search was optimized for their pain, but they also achieved the ultimate. They saw their exact situation in the clickbait fields, which is great for them as well. They find the solution very quickly, but also good for us too, because all that effort that someone's put into making that amazing knowledge article is being used, it's being found, it's being read, and is going to result in one less phone call or email or ticket coming through. So this is all through the ability to answer those two crucial questions. Do you know what your customer is searching for? Because their context, their experiences, and their pain are the fuel that will help you optimize your knowledge articles to be as findable as possible. And the second one, do you know what your customers see when they do search? Because ultimately, what they do see, that is their clickbait, and we must make sure they see themselves to make that article as clickable as possible. So two easy ways that you can optimize your knowledge articles, and the result is not only you'll have a knowledge base that gets used, which is really good, but people will remember it because of the Google effect or digital amnesia. People will keep coming back to your knowledge base and searching because they know they can find the answers there, and they won't remember what the answer is, but that's fine. They'll remember that the answers are in there, which means you'll get a lot of people continuing to use your knowledge base well into the future. And that's it from me. So thank you very, very much for listening. I'll hand back over to you, David.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. That was great. I love that Google effect. You're absolutely right. I think culturally it's habit forming, isn't it? I think that if you ask a Z gen to think of something, I think that's the first thing they would do. I don't think they think, would they? They go straight in. I love the context stuff as well. The nuances around understanding some of that frying pan is perfect, isn't it? If you've ever worked in a service desk before, that frying pan is absolutely perfect. And when you think of succession planning and training and bringing in new people, how quickly that can either get lost or be enforced to something. That's really cool. I love the click bit as well, and that context. What about intent? We've got a couple of questions come through. Actually, Barbara asked the question that was answered about symptoms included in context, which I think you've answered there. Intent. So when you look at context and outcomes, is that intent and context actually the same thing in that sort of situation, or are they two separate things? So you've got the context and you understand an intent. It's built into the sort of intelligence of the platform. Does that make sense?
Can you say what you mean by intent a little bit more? Do you mean like the intent to? Sorry,
the outcome. So the intended outcome so if somebody's using it, so you've got the context, which may be contextual, but would it drive an intent to get to the place that you're coming from? So if you look at sort of a similar thing, maybe in a chatbot, you've got a chatbot. The intent in a chatbot, which is obviously less intelligent, but the intent of what you're trying to ask using that sort of NLP stuff, does that work in this as well?
Yeah, it can do. Intent is one of those things I think people are more likely to search for that when they sort of anticipate what the solution is going to be and what their endpoint is. And sometimes that will be like I say, the case if you already know what the end game is. If you don't know what that end game is and you just want to get something up and running, most of the time, at least this is what the research shows, people search for their context and their pain more than their intent. However, that is different per organization, and that's why it's so important to download those search terms yourself, because you might be working with a group of people who they do search for their intent primarily over their context, but that doesn't matter. If you, as long as you know what those clickbait fields are and get those search terms in there, they could be very intent-based phrases, looking at the, okay, need to be able to log into Teams rather than can't log into Teams, or anything to do with the error message or that kind of thing. So I usually find context is a more popular search, but I think it will depend on your audience, the demographic of your end users, how used to they are using search engines like that. Do they use them just like Google, or do they use them in a completely different way? It can be quite complicated, actually.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Hannah. That was fantastic. Now we are gonna move on. There was a question in there, Hannah, as well about the research, and hopefully we'll have a chance maybe to share that as well at some point. Yes. I think some people are interested in that too, which is great. So thank you very much indeed, Hannah, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime very soon. So hopefully, thank you. Thanks very much.